Signage and Wayfinding Design, a complete guide to creating environmental graphic design systems by Chris Calori and David Vanden-Eynden. Chapter 4, The Information Content System. Signs are meaningless without information. What good is a blank sign? Signs exist for one purpose and one purpose only: to communicate information to people about their environment. See Figure 4.1. Unlike other objects intentionally placed in the built environment, such as light fixtures, walls, flooring, landscaping, and so on, signs literally speak to people in that they convey meaningful information that people in turn act upon. In this respect, a sign is one of the few truly interactive elements of the built environment. And because people have to engage in the act of reading the information on signs, signs also are among the most scrutinized objects in the built environment. Other environmental objects, by their very form and existence, may connote an inherent message, e.g., a fence or high wall connotes "stay out." But they do not do so in a literal, denotative manner as do signs. See Figure 4.2. Put simply, a sign program's information content system consists of what the signs say, the information they communicate, and where that information is located in the environment. The information content system of a signage program can be compared to the operating system of a computer. Like all those unseen zeros and ones in a computer program, the information content system makes the sign program function. Indeed, it is the essence of signage, but it's intangible in that it doesn't take physical form. Put another way, a sign program's information content system is the program's communication infrastructure, the network of content that links all the signs in a program together informationally. As explained in Chapter 2 and 3, it's essential to plan and develop the information content system, an activity often called programming, early on in a project. Programming is critical because before meaningful design activity for the graphic and hardware systems can take place, the EG designer has to have a good idea of the amount of information each sign will display, the physical conditions of each sign's location, and the viewing conditions for each sign. Unlike other graphic design projects, it's typically the responsibility of the EG designer to take the lead in formulating the informational content of a signage program, with the input and approval of the client. In contrast, in collateral, web, advertising, and other graphic design projects, the informational content, at least text content, is typically provided by others, such as professional copywriters. Why do EG designers generate the informational content for sign programs? Because they possess the skills to analyze a site's plan, its circulation paths, and the informational needs of its users, all necessary to map out where signs are needed and the kinds of information content the signs should convey. More conventional content providers, such as copywriters, do not possess these skills. It's important to reiterate that information content system development consists primarily of locating signs and generating their messages. Typically, the EG designer plays a lead role in locating signs, with the EG designer and the client playing a mutual role in the formulation of the sign messages. In some projects, the sign message content may be almost entirely developed by the client, with the guidance of the EG designer. In other projects, the sign message content may be almost entirely developed by the EG designer with the client's advice and approval. Kinds of sign information content. The information content system serves many functions in a signage program and provides many kinds of informational content. For example, in wayfinding signage, the information content system is the breadcrumb trail that helps people find their way through an environment. See Figure 4.3. The various types of informational content communicated by signage are categorized in this section, along with an indication of who may generate the message content and locations for each type of information. In a comprehensive signage program, all or many of these kinds of information will be displayed on the program's various sign types. But before we delve into these categories, keep in mind that every signage program and every EG designer is different, so some EG designers may use different terms than the ones used here to refer to the various kinds of sign information content. Additionally, some of these informational content categories may overlap. Identification. Signs are located at a destination to identify that destination or place in an environment. Identification signs confirm that you have arrived at a destination, and they may or may not have directional signs leading to them. Identification sign message content, that is, destination names or room numbering systems, may be generated by the EG designer and/or the client. Identification sign locations are typically mapped out by the EG designer. Message content and locations for identification signs related to life safety and accessibility are often mandated by code authorities. See Figures 4.4 and 4.5. Directional. Signs are located remotely from destinations to direct people to the various destinations within a given environment. Directional signs are often referred to as wayfinding signs because they help people find their way to destinations. Directional signs almost always display arrows to point out specific paths, such as left, right, straight ahead to destinations. Direct sign message content, that is, the destination names, may be generated by the EG designer and/or the client. Directional sign locations are typically mapped out by the EG designer. Locations and message content of directional signs related to life safety and accessibility are often mandated by code authorities. See Figures 4.6 and 4.7. Warning. Signs alert people of hazards or safety procedures within an environment. Two common examples are danger, high voltage, and in case of fire, use stairs unless otherwise instructed. Warning sign message content and locations may be developed by the EG designer and/or the client, and often are mandated by code authorities. See Figures 4.8 and 4.9. Regulatory and prohibitory signs are intended to regulate people's behavior or prohibit certain activities within an environment. Two common examples in this category are authorized personnel only and no smoking. Regulatory and prohibitory sign message content and locations may be developed by the EG designer and/or the client, as well as mandated by code authorities. See Figures 4.10 and 4.11. Operational signs inform people about an environment's use and operations, thus may often be quite detailed, requiring some time to study and absorb. One example is directory signs, also called directories, which list the location of tenants within an environment, often accompanied by a locator map. Other examples include signs listing days and hours of operation, such as for a retail store, and the all visitors must be announced signs, which are ubiquitous in Manhattan apartment buildings. Message, content, and locations for operational signs may be generated by the EG designer and or the client. See figures 4.12 through 4.14. Honorific signs confer honor on people associated with an environment. The prime example is donor signage, which displays the names of financial benefactors of a site or facility. Another example is a building cornerstone, which typically displays the date of erection, along with the names of the building's developers, architects, and other notables. Honorific signage is most common at institutional and civic sites and facilities. The message content for honorific signage is typically provided by the client, but sign locations may be mapped out by the EG designer or the client. See figures 4.15 and 4.16. Interpretive signage helps people interpret the meaning of an environment or places within it by providing information on its history, geography, inhabitants, artifacts, and more. Examples include plaques that commemorate the events that took place at a historical site, such as a battlefield, and signs that provide information about the animals at a zoo or aquarium. Research, often quite scholarly and detailed, is usually required to develop the information content for interpretive signage, and the research content development and locations of interpretive signs may be undertaken by the EG designer, the client, and/or experts in the subject matter of the interpretive program. See figures 4.17 and 4.18. Hierarchy of content. Not all informational content is equal in a signage program. Some sign messages and locations are more important than others. Therefore, the designer must impose a hierarchical ranking on an environment's sign messages and locations based on relative importance. In this process, signs are ranked in regard to whether the information they display is primary, secondary, tertiary, or even less important. The general principle is that the more important the information, the higher the rank. This in turn translates into the size of the graphics conveying the information and correspondingly the size of the sign itself. Logically then, signs communicating primary information are larger than those communicating secondary information, and so on. Additionally, the ranking of the information determines how visually prominent the sign that displays it should be. Generally speaking, the higher up a sign is displayed within limits, the more visually prominent it is. Chapter 6, the hardware system, has more on sign mounting heights. There are two basic related reasons why a sign information hierarchy is necessary: to enhance communication effectiveness and to conserve space on sign faces. Regarding the first, communication effectiveness, consider an airport terminal, which has many destinations, some of which are more important to a greater number of people than others. For example, more people will be seeking out check-in gate and baggage claim areas, primary destinations, than the nursery, secondary or tertiary destination. To give all of these destinations equal importance on a primary directional sign, or indeed even to include all of them on such a sign, leads to information overload and communication breakdown, particularly with directional signs, which often list multiple destinations. There is a limit to how much information people can absorb while moving through an environment, especially if they are in vehicles. A similar circumstance occurs with signs displaying content other than directional information. Continuing with the airport example, it would be confusing if the airport's hours of operation were signed with the same prominence as the check-in area or other major destinations. Similar confusion and overload would arise if the nursery and janitor's closets were identified as prominently as the gate numbers. Related to communication effectiveness, sign information hierarchies help conserve sign space. As the old saying goes, you can't pour 10 pounds of flour into a 5-pound sack. The amount of space a sign has for the display of information is often constrained by various physical site factors, such as low ceiling heights, which limit the height of overhead signs to allow adequate vertical clearance for people or vehicles to pass underneath. A sign that's limited in size is also limited in informational capacity. Therefore, it should not contain messages other than those that are the most important. Even where there are fewer physical site constraints on sign face size, loading too much information on a sign is dysfunctional. Developing the sign information content system. As noted at the beginning of this chapter, developing a sign information content system is often called programming, and this process is best introduced with a question. What information do sign users need, and where do they need it? Essentially, this process entails mapping out sign locations and establishing the message nomenclature that will be displayed on the signs at each location. Sign locations. Sign locations are determined by analyzing circulation routes and decision points within the project environment. This process, too, can be addressed by posing questions. Where are the pathways that people move along, and where along those pathways must people decide whether to make a turn or proceed straight ahead? The EG designer answers those questions by reviewing the project's plan drawings, which depict a site or building from above, and marking out where the circulation routes and decision points are. If the project at hand is new and not yet built, plan drawings are the primary tool for analyzing circulation and decision points. If, on the other hand, the project site exists, the EG designer has an additional tool. He or she can visit the site to survey circulation and decision points in situations. Obviously, it takes more skill to envision circulation and decision points for a site that doesn't yet exist and is defined solely by drawing than for a site that can be directionally experienced. Whether or not the project site exists, however, plan drawings are the medium for sign location analysis. See Figure 4.19. Although plan review focuses on lateral circulation, it's necessary to keep in mind that for many project environments, vertical circulation routes are just as important as the lateral ones. A great many sites, such as rail stations, airports, hospitals, retail malls, and parking garages, have multiple floor levels, and the vertical circulation pathway between these levels present key decision points for navigating the site. See figures 4.20 through 4.22. Section drawings, which are vertical slices through a building that reveal the stacking of its levels, can aid vertical circulation analysis. BIM models, which are digital and 3D, can provide useful visuals of a project site that doesn't exist, including static perspective views, sections at any point, and animated fly-throughs. These BIM visualizations are great tools that can help EG designers better assist both lateral and vertical circulation routes for projects that are not yet built. After studying decision points and user circulation, the EG designer begins to map out the signs on plan drawings, making a mark to indicate each sign on the plan. This initial go-around of the sign location plans may include just primary signs. For simplicity and clarity, they may be color-coded by communication function. For example, red for directional signs, blue for identification signs, and so on. See Figure 4.23. Remember though, as pointed out in Chapter 2, color coding can be useful for the initial sign location plans, but the final sign location plans should not rely on color coding to communicate important information about each sign, as the final location plans may be printed in black and white only. Keep in mind that, like the design process itself, developing sign locations plans is also an evolutionary process. So expect to go through several iterations of the sign location plans and corresponding messages before they are finalized. Tips for determining sign locations. Always locate signs perpendicular to the viewer's line of movement in sight, as people can't see signs located parallel to their line of movement/sight without turning their heads. This can be dangerous, particularly in driving situations, when drivers need to keep their gaze focused on the road ahead. Always locate directional signs at decision points, and on long pathways, reinforce the information on additional signs to assure people they're headed in the correct direction to their destination, as shown in Figure 4.24. In certain situations, particularly those involving vehicular signage where reaction time is a factor, use advanced directional signs, e.g., departing flights next left, to give people enough time to maneuver the decision point. Use these in tandem with confirmatory directional signs, e.g., departing flights with a left directional arrow at the actual decision points, as shown in Figure 4.25. Place identification signs at the destinations to where people have been directed to confirm their arrival at the destination they've been seeking, as shown in Figure 4.25. Thus, the wayfinding breadcrumb trail has been laid. Directional signs point to the various destinations at each decision point along a circulation route, and each destination is identified to confirm that it has been reached. After the initial sign location plans have been developed, the EG designer should examine the site conditions at each location. These site condition factors include viewing distances, viewing angles, physical limitations on sign sizes and/or mounting heights, such as low ceiling clearances or narrower corridor widths, physical sightline obstructions, which can be immobile such as columns or trees, or movable such as people or vehicles, lighting conditions, sign mounting opportunities, adjacent surfaces, finishes, and functions. As with circulation analysis, it's easier to determine conditions at each sign location when the project environment actually exists and can be surveyed in person, rather than having to rely solely on drawings and other visualizations. But on projects whose sites are not yet built, drawings provide the primary reference for site conditions, so all available architectural and/or engineering drawings need to be studied carefully. In addition to plan drawings, these architectural drawings include elevations and sections with elevations showing vertical surfaces such as walls and doors, and sections showing vertical slices through the site. On projects that require ceiling-mounted signs, those drawings include reflected ceiling plans, RCPs, which should be consulted to ascertain ceiling conditions at each sign location. Renderings, models, fly-throughs, and other visualizations of the site are also helpful in assessing sign location conditions. Again, such visualizations are getting easier to obtain as BIM gains hold in the architectural arena. Another important design consideration has to do with scale. That is, even if the final sign location plan documents aren't prepared at a measurable scale, early sign location studies should take place on plans of a measurable scale so that viewing distances can be accurately measured with a scale ruler. Why is viewing distance so important? First, among other signage provisions, guidelines such as the Americans with Disability Act, ADA's Standards for Accessible Design, SAD, specify character heights related to sign mounting heights and/or viewing distances. Second, the farther the distance from which a sign must be viewed, the larger the sign typography must be, and the larger the typography, the larger the sign size must be to accommodate it. Chapters 5 and 6 go into greater detail about sizing sign typography for viewing distances. By identifying site parameters and constraints, the information gathered in studying sign locations begins to set the stage for designing the sign program's graphic and hardware systems, as well as for defining the program's sign types. It also aids in identifying and coordinating sign locations that require additional support systems to be brought in, such as electrical or structural. As the EG designer learns more about the conditions at each sign location, the sign location plans will be refined and filled with all the signs necessary for the program. Concurrently with mapping out sign locations, the EG designer is also mapping out messages to be communicated at each location, which leads to a discussion of message nomenclature development. Sign messages. Each project site requires a message nomenclature vocabulary. This should be a consistent and concise collection of messages to be displayed on the site signage. The operative words here are consistent and concise, for a nomenclature vocabulary that is both consistent and concise is essential for clear communication of the sign information system. A consistent sign message vocabulary is key to maintaining the breadcrumb trail of information. Once a destination name has been determined, it should be used on every sign relating to it. As the saying goes, don't change horses in the midstream. Developing the sign message nomenclature system is not an exercise in creative writing. Also, never use synonyms. Imagine the confusion of users if some signs in a program display the message downtown and others display the message center city. Both have the same basic meaning, but using the terms interchangeably within a sign program causes confusion. Hence, rigid adherence to consistency of message nomenclature is essential for clearly communicating the sign information system. The sign message vocabulary must also be concise, for two previously stated reasons: to conserve sign space and to prevent information overload. Accordingly, a message should communicate the essential information needed by the sign user in a concise as a manner as possible. For example, often the official names of destinations are quite lengthy, such as Ford's Theater National Historical Site, and such messages take up a lot of real estate on a sign face. The more concise message, Ford's Theater, communicates the core information necessary for sign users far more clearly and effectively than the lengthy official message. Accordingly, destination names must be reviewed and edited for conciseness and clarity, and consistently used once edited. Note, however, that it may be difficult to build consensus with clients on the use of the edited versions of destination names. See Figure 4.26. Related to the conciseness of the message nomenclature vocabulary is the use of abbreviations, which is sometimes necessary to conserve sign space. The rule of thumb is that abbreviations should only be used in sign nomenclature when they are highly recognized by the general public. Examples of highly recognized abbreviations include ST for street, HWY for highway, FL for floor, INTL for international, DEPT for department. Stay away from less recognized abbreviations such as ARPT for airport, TERM for terminal, STN for station, DNTN for downtown. Again, once the decision has been made to use a given abbreviation, use it consistently throughout the sign program. One more point, don't hyphenate sign messages. While hyphenating words may be acceptable in large blocks of newspaper or book text, it is unacceptable in signage. Another critical element is achieving consistency of message vocabulary in message syntax, which refers to how the sign messages are structured. For example, there are two common ways to indicate a numerical series, such as levels of a building. Levels 1 to 5, levels 1-5. Both the word to and the dash are widely recognized, hence acceptable to use. But to prevent confusion, one method or the other must be chosen and employed consistently throughout a sign program. As stated previously, the EG designer is typically the lead orchestrator of the information content system for a sign program. In some cases, this entails structuring and editing message content, such as destination names provided by the client. In other cases, the EG designer generates an entirely new message nomenclature vocabulary to impose on the project site. That is, he or she develops a new destination naming system that relates directly to the informational needs of the project sign users. The most straightforward example of this name imposition is the development of a signage room numbering system for a building in which the room numbers on the architectural plans must be superseded by a different naming system for signage purposes. The need for this arises when the room numbers assigned during the architectural design process, which properly fulfilled their architectural function, do not make the sense from a communication standpoint to a person navigating the building. For example, rooms are commonly added or deleted during the architectural design process, resulting in room numbers on the plans that aren't in any logical sequence for a sign user. Thus, the EG designer is called upon to develop a new, more logical room numbering system for sign program use. The EG designer may also generate and impose even more comprehensive new signage nomenclature vocabularies for complex, multi-building sites with the goal of organizing the site's nomenclature to simplify and clarify user orientation and navigation. These vocabularies are almost always hierarchical and are developed for unbuilt as well as existing sites. A classic example is a new signage nomenclature vocabulary for a hospital complex that has grown from its original building to several buildings, often with complex, interconnected, lateral and vertical circulation routes. See Figure 4.27. Navigation, message hierarchy, and proximity. People navigate from general to specific destinations, and the sign information system needs to be organized accordingly. Navigation is a process of zeroing in on a specific target destination in ever more discrete nesting steps. In a simple example, consider the steps involved for a woman who lives outside of a city's downtown district who is visiting a friend in a downtown hospital. She must 1. Find her way to the downtown district within the city. 2. Find the hospital within the downtown district. 3. Find the proper wing within the hospital. 4. Find the proper floor within the wing. 5. Find the proper room on the floor. Obviously, when this woman first enters the freeway to head downtown, she isn't going to see her friend's hospital room number on the freeway directional signs. She's likely to see the word downtown, which is the first most general layer of the informational hierarchy leading to her friend's hospital room sign. The point here is that it's completely inappropriate, let alone impossible, to display every single specific destination within an environment on all directional signs within the environment. Therefore, sign information must be organized so that it builds from less detailed to more detailed the closer the sign user gets to his or her target destination. See figures 4.28. In another example, consider a traveler entering a new city environment. Hundreds of thousands of destinations, ranging from major to insignificant, lie within the city, but they couldn't and shouldn't all be listed on directional signage. For a cohesive, comprehensible sign information system, the destinations need to be organized on two bases: hierarchy and proximity. Hierarchy. Developing a sign information hierarchy starts with reviewing and analyzing all the various destinations within the project environment. The first step is to make a list of these destinations and then begin to rank them in order of importance for the sign user. Some rankings will be obvious, such as in an airport, where a janitor's closet would be a less important destination than the security checkpoint. In a city wayfinding example, the municipal sewage plant would be a less important destination than the city government offices or the train station. In determining the ranking of destination, the client's input is extremely valuable and often essential, particularly for projects such as urban or campus signage programs. In these cases, the client often has hard and/or anecdotal data regarding which destinations are most sought out or visited by the most people, and this data can be used to determine which destinations appear on which signs. This data is often referred to as trip generation data. Keep in mind that some destinations are just not important enough to be displayed on directional signs. Nevertheless, people will seek out these less important destinations so they can be included on map signs, paper map handouts, and mobile wayfinding applications. Space permitting, a good example of this sort of sign information hierarchy is found at large regional shopping malls. The primary vehicular directional signs typically display only the major anchor store destinations because listing all the smaller specialty shops would overload the signs with information too detailed to be absorbed effectively. Instead, the specialty store names are displayed on the interior mall directory maps, which contain detailed information that requires more time to study and absorb. Proximity. Along with hierarchy, sign information can be organized and displayed according to its proximity to the destination. Again, signs have limited message capacity, so not all destinations can be displayed on all signs within an environment. However, destination names are dropped from signs once they have been reached, freeing up capacity for new destinations so that as the information system courses through a site, messages are added and deleted from signs. The general objective of proximity-based messaging is to add a destination to a sign when the sign's location is near to the destination. Just how near to the destination is a judgment call that varies with each project. and depends on the hierarchical ranking of a given destination. A very high-ranking destination, such as downtown, may be displayed on a sign quite far away from the destination, along with less highly ranked destinations in closer proximity to the sign location. For all but the most highly ranked destinations, however, a standard should be established stating at which point a destination will be added to a sign. The standard may be different for each project. It might, for example, state that the destination name will be added to all signs located within a 500-foot radius of the destination, or within a 0.5-mile radius, depending on the size of the sign's program's environment and the density of destinations within it. See Figure 4.29. Other factors affecting the sign information content system. By now, it should be obvious that developing the sign information content system is not a simple process, so it shouldn't be surprising to learn that there are still other factors that make it even more complex. These factors are primarily related to various government regulations and guidelines, as well as multiple language considerations. Unlike most graphic design projects, the information, graphics, and hardware systems of a signage program are affected by federal, state, and municipal codes and regulations of various forms. It is beyond the scope of this book to delve into the details of these regulations, which are numerous and constantly being revised. Rather, the objective here is to raise awareness of the fact that signage must be designed with government regulations in mind, in order to help both the EG designer and the client to avoid pitfalls. To begin, it is important to note that regulations and guidelines, including those affecting signage, are typically written in cumbersome legal language that can be interpreted in several ways. It is therefore advisable for the EG designer and the client to thoroughly research and review the applicable sign regulations and then develop viable compliance strategies with the input of legal counsel, code consultants, regulatory officials, and professional/trade organizations as deemed necessary. Signage and the Americans with Disabilities Act. The Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, is a federal regulation enacted by Congress to serve civil rights for disabled Americans, and these rights include physical access to the built environment. To that end, the ADA includes numerous provisions that affect physical elements of buildings and transportation facilities, including signage. These provisions were originally contained within the Americans with Disabilities Act Accessibility Guidelines, ADAAG, which were published in 1991. The ADAAG was updated in July 2004 and renamed ADA Standards for Accessible Design, SAD, which was adopted in 2010. The 2010 SAD guidelines are currently in effect and are available from the U.S. Department of Justice website at www.ada.gov or from the U.S. Access Board website at www.access-board.gov. In addition to the federal regulations, it's important to be aware that a number of states and local jurisdictions also have accessibility regulations and guidelines that affect signage, sometimes differently or more stringently than the federal regulations. While the SAD is a subset of the broader ADA legislation, this book uses the term SAD and ADA somewhat interchangeably, partially because the term ADA has become so commonly associated with signage. The intent of the SAD signage provisions is to promote equal access to the built environment for visually impaired persons, as well as to point out accessible routes for those with mobility impairment. It's important to note that the 2010 SAD signage provisions differ considerably from those of the 1991 ADAAG. The 2010 SAD signage provisions are more complex, notably making a distinction between tactile/raised and visual characters, with different standards for each and require much study. Also note that this book is not intended to provide technical or legal advice on any aspect of the ADA/SAD, and that EG designers are advised to become thoroughly acquainted with current guidelines. The SAD signage provisions stipulate standards to be met in the display of sign information. They do not, however, mandate specific messages that must be displayed on signs, nor that signs even be required at all. However, whenever a sign is programmed, it must conform to all applicable ADA standards. See figures 4.30 through 4.32. The ADA signage provisions also address aspects of a sign program's graphic and hardware system design, among them figure/ground contrast, symbol use, dimensional limits, and finish. These are discussed further in chapters 5 and 6. In addition to the 2010 SAD guidelines document itself, a useful resource to guide EG designers and their clients is the SEGD 2012 ADA White Paper Update, which is discussed in greater detail in Chapter 5, the Graphic System. Local codes and interior signage. Local codes, be they on the state or municipal level, contain regulations that affect the information content system of certain signs in a building environment, typically those relating to life safety and often accessibility. These codes can mandate both the locations and messages to be displayed on signage. The local building code is the most obvious and common source of interior signage regulations, but these may also be buried in local administrative and health codes. Building codes are usually adopted on a statewide basis, and they can vary from state to state. Although building code standardization efforts among the states are underway, certain large municipalities, such as New York City, have their own building codes that supersede the state building code. It can be difficult to identify the local codes that apply to signage and then to find the regulations on signage within the applicable codes. For example, even though some building codes have a section dedicated to signage, don't be fooled into thinking that all the code's signage regulations are neatly contained in that section, because there's a good chance that other signage regulations are scattered throughout other sections of the code. For example, a requirement for an elevator emergency evacuation sign may be buried in the elevator section of the code, and don't trust the code's index to capture all of the regulations pertaining to signs or signage, because they often don't. The only reliable solution is to visually scan the entire code for the word sign or signage, if the code is in print form, or use the search function, if available, if the code is in electronic form. Many states and cities adopt standard building codes formulated by independent code councils, such as the International Building Code, IBC, developed by the International Code Council, ICC. Other localities adopt a standard building code with amendments/addenda tailored to the locality. Still, others have their own proprietary building codes. A word of warning: Building codes are updated on a regular or sporadic basis, so it's always necessary to ensure that you're consulting the edition of the code that affects your project. It's wise to verify the applicable code edition, which is not always the most current one, with the client or project architect. Standard building codes, which are available in book and increasingly digital form, can be purchased from the independent councils that develop them. Some proprietary city building codes, such as the New York City Code, are available for purchase through city government channels. Still, other building codes are available without charge on the internet. As stated at the beginning of this section, local codes pertaining to interior signage typically mandate location and message content of life safety information for building emergencies. This includes information at elevator lobbies that directs people to use the fire stairs instead of elevators to exit the building during emergencies. Local codes also typically specify information that must be displayed on both the occupancy side and stair side of fire stairwells to orient both evacuees and emergency personnel to them. The message wording for such signs may be mandated by the code, as well as the sizes, colors, and/or style of the typography used to display the messages. The code may also mandate the location, mounting height, panel material, requirements for any symbols or diagrams, and other aspects of such signs. Additionally, because some information on these signs can identify permanent spaces, any identifying information must also meet ADA provisions. Outside the scope of work of AG designers are standard illuminated building exit signs and illuminated signs identifying designated areas of refuge or areas of rescue assistance. The reason? These signs are usually required to be illuminated, often on dedicated circuits with backup power, so they are typically the responsibility of electrical engineering professionals. In addition to life safety signs typically mandated in the building code, other local codes may affect locations, message content, size, and so on of other kinds of interior signs. Examples of such local code related signage abound, but two of the most common are no smoking signs and maximum occupancy signs for public assembly spaces. The state of California, for example, mandates the message, content, location, size, pictograms, and so on of restroom identification signs, making it restroom signs the most distinctive in the nation. With so many codes affecting interior signage, it's no wonder that code conflicts occasionally arise. Typically between local and national requirements, in such circumstances, strategies must be developed to comply with both, and it can be helpful to consult with local building officials who will have the final word on whether the interior signage is adequate for a certificate of occupancy. Local codes and exterior signage. Exterior signs, too, come under the auspices of various local codes. Specifically, state and municipal building codes are typically concerned with the safety of exterior signs themselves, such as the structural integrity to withstand prescribed wind forces and the soundness of electrical systems and connections. Other local codes, usually municipal sign or zoning ordinances, are concerned with aesthetics, that is, controlling the visual character of a community sign. Such ordinances, which vary from locale to locale, have been enacted in response to the mostly unattractive hodgepodge of sign styles that have mushroomed along the commercial strips of so many American towns and cities. These ordinances typically apply to commercial signs, but also sometimes to directional signs, and can range from highly to loosely restrictive. depending on the locale or zoning district within the locale. Sign ordinance restrictions can include square footage, height, location, quantity, form, materials, illumination, and other elements. An example is a community whose commercial signs are all small, low-lying, extremely illuminated, carved wood panels with painted and gilded graphics sitting on twin carved wood posts. It is not the intent of this book to focus on commercial signage or on the ordinances that may control them within any given community. So suffice it to say that sign ordinances are definitely well-intentioned, but they can also be open to interpretation, hence causing contention. More to the point of this book is that sign ordinances can pose problems for the EG designer, especially when an ordinance places restrictions on directional signs. For example, an ordinance that places unrealistic size restrictions on directional signs can limit either the amount of informational content that can be displayed on the sign or the size of that information to the point at which the sign fails to carry out its communication function. Usually before an exterior sign can be erected, sign ordinances require filing a permit application at the local jurisdiction, accompanied by an illustration of the sign to demonstrate that the sign will comply with the ordinance. Some communities may additionally require that any proposed exterior signage be presented to a local governing body for approval, particularly if a variance is being sought for the sign or signs. A variance is basically an official permit for the sign to vary from the ordinance, and they can be difficult to obtain. On certain projects, the EG designer may be involved in providing renderings or plan and evaluation drawings of the exterior signs for local approval, as well as in making presentations to local authorities. The square footage aspect of sign ordinances in particular is open to interpretation, raising the question of what the square footage applies to. Is it just the message area or the overall sign face? Does it include exposed support structures, such as vertical posts, that are unsuitable for carrying message content? These are important questions because the message area footprint takes up far less than 100% of a sign's square footage, and it's almost always surrounded by dead space or white space in the form of margins and any spaces between lines of typography that contain no message content but are essential for good readability. The point is, one can make a valid argument that dead space, including exposed support structures, should not be included in the square footage calculation. Indeed, many local sign ordinances permit square footage calculations on just the message area. See Figure 4.33. It is useful for EG designers to work with the client's attorneys, engineers, and architects in locales with exterior sign ordinances. There are also various resources for additional information about exterior sign ordinances, including the United States Council, www.ussc.org, and the International Sign Association, www.signs.org. Bilingual and multilingual sign information. Undoubtedly, most EG designers will become involved in signage projects that require bi- or multilingual sign information. Whether those projects are in the United States or in other countries, English, of course, is the standard language used on signage in the U.S., but in certain regions, cities, and neighborhoods, additional languages may be required on signs due to large populations for whom English is not their first language. See Figure 4.34. In the United States, Spanish is the most common second language that's displayed on signage. In many other countries, English is widely employed as a second language to the native language of the country, particularly on signage at international facilities such as airports, train stations, exposition centers, and so forth. Designing sign programs to provide efficient wayfinding and orientation in environments that serve speakers of multiple languages presents unique challenges to EGD professionals. Obviously, the more languages that need to be displayed on a sign, the larger the sign must be, and this can lead to difficulties or trade-offs at sign locations that present physical constraints on sign sizes. Furthermore, in addition to requiring much larger sign faces, research has shown that signage displaying more than 3 languages is confusing and ineffective. Another issue is that sign messages in many other languages, such as Spanish, French, and German, are lengthier than those same messages in English, making it incumbent on the EG designer to obtain translations of the sign message content concurrent with the development of the English Information Content System. To help address some of these language-related design issues, the SEGD participated in the Hablamos Juntos initiative, which examines and presents strategies for effective orientation of multilingual users to U.S. healthcare environments. These strategies include use of symbols, maps, and human assistance to augment signage in a total communication package for speakers of languages other than English. Although the Hablamos Juntos initiative is geared towards healthcare environments, its findings and recommendations can be applied to other environments serving speakers of multiple languages. For more information and to access documents from this initiative, go to www.scgd.org. In an integrated communication strategy, applications for mobile devices can provide supportive orientation information in languages that aren't displayed on the physical signs. As stated previously, such technology continues to evolve, and large organizational structures may not support such an integrated strategy across communication channels. For signage programs in the United States, messages in English are almost always displayed above or before their translations into other languages. For signage programs in other countries, the opposite is usually the case. Messages in the country's native language take precedence over their English versions. Another language-specific design issue that EG designers must account for is reading direction. Consider that while English and most other languages read from left to right, others, such as Hebrew and Arabic, read from right to left. See figure 4.35. And Chinese, which traditionally read vertically from top to bottom, is now also commonly read horizontally from left to right. Even within the English language, there are differences that can cause signage dilemmas, specifically in spelling and nomenclature between English and British English. The British version is typically standard for signage in countries that historically were in the sphere of British influence, such as Singapore and India, as well as for some countries that were not, such as mainland China. Common examples of these variations are listed here. American usage, exit. British usage, way out. American, restroom. British, WC for water closet or wash closet or toilet. American, elevator. British, lift. American, garage. British, car park. American, center. British, center. American theater. British theater. Pictorial information content. Thus far, this chapter has focused on word-based information content, but some sign information can be communicated pictorially, without words. Pictorial content includes symbols, which are pictures that represent things or concepts, and diagrams, such as maps. Note that in this context, the words symbol, glyph, icon, and pictogram are basically synonymous and are used interchangeably, although this book primarily uses the term symbol. The intention of this section is to give a general overview of pictorial information content for signage. It is not intended as a technical dissertation on symbiotics. Symbols. Symbols are used on signs as a shorthand substitute for words, but to be effective, they must be easy to understand. For example, the symbol of an airplane can substitute for the word airport, and the symbol in the figure of a man can substitute for men's restroom. Directional arrows, too, can be considered symbols, in that they serve as a pictorial shorthand for worded directions, such as straight ahead, turn left, and the like. Symbols are very useful in signage programs for 3 reasons. They conserve sign space, their meaning can transcend language barriers, as the airplane symbol does. They can sometimes communicate more clearly and concisely than words, as arrows do. The meaning of certain symbols, such as directional arrows and the airplane symbol, is immediately obvious to most people. The meaning of other symbols has to be learned and can vary by culture. For example, consider the symmetrical Red Cross symbol on signs, which connotes first aid in most Western cultures. Yet worldwide, its connection to first aid isn't as obvious as the airplane symbol is to airport. This is because the Red Cross derives its connection to the first aid from its use by the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, and this is a learned connection. In predominantly Muslim cultures, however, the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies uses a red crescent symbol on signs to connote first aid. Note, to protect the trademark rights of the Red Cross Relief Organization, the Red Cross symbol used in signage has been replaced recently by a green cross symbol to indicate first aid. Even the seemingly universal symbols of male and female figures for men's and women's restrooms don't transcend all cultures. Typically, these symbols are based on Western dress, with the men in slacks and the women in a skirt. But these depictions are less effective and can even be offensive in cultures where both men and women wear long robes, such as certain countries in the Middle East. As useful as symbols are, many concepts are too complex to be readily communicated by them. For this reason, it's almost impossible to design a sign information content system that consists entirely of symbols. But judiciously used, symbols can streamline communication on signs, and because symbols can transcend language barriers, they can be very useful on signage at facilities where users of many languages and cultures gather, such as airports, medical facilities, and theme parks. In some cases, symbols can be used alone without words to communicate the necessary information, but again, only if they are well understood and culturally appropriate. In other cases, symbols can be used to reinforce the word messages, or to serve in a sense as a second language to help users not familiar with the written language displayed on the signs. In other cases, symbols may not be used at all to communicate the sign information. And finally, all 3 of these alternatives are possible within a given sign program. See Figure 4.36. There are several vocabularies of symbols, some of which have been adopted for official standard use by governing and regulatory bodies in the United States. A more in-depth discussion of symbols is contained in Chapter 5, the graphic system. Diagrams. In addition to symbols, diagrams can also convey sign information content in a pictorial manner. By far, the most common diagrams used in signage are maps. The fascinating and deep subject of maps in general, and in signage in particular, could comprise a book unto itself. The purpose here is to provide a brief overview of the information content role maps play in signage programs. Maps are essentially useful in communicating the position of places and spaces, including transportation links such as train and bus routes, in relation to each other, and therefore as wayfinding and navigational aids. Maps can visually substitute for a complex series of directions and words as they do on evacuation route map signs in hotel rooms. As stated earlier, however, many people do not understand maps. Moreover, maps require detailed study because most people cannot interpret them quickly. Accordingly, from a design standpoint, maps should generally be considered as adjunct information content for a sign program. Of course, maps also usually require legends in order to communicate effectively, and those legends are in the form of words and/or symbols. To prevent confusion, it's imperative that map legend nomenclature match the nomenclature used in a sign program's overall information content system. More in-depth discussion on maps is presented in Chapter 5, the graphic system. Another example of diagrammatic sign information is the interstate highway signs that depict the position of the various traffic lanes and turnoffs at complex interchanges. Signage master plans. A signage master plan, at least as defined in our office, is often the result of the information content development process. It is a document in which sign locations and messages are planned for the long term, a plan that is, in many cases, adopted in phases over time. The point is that it takes a long-term view, considering the informational needs of a site over time, minimizing informational or nomenclature changes as the site itself changes. Signage master plans work best for planned environments that have predicted growth patterns. The EG designer develops an information content system for the planned environment at full build-out, rather than taking a piecemeal, reactive approach as each site within its built. Signage master plans take a holistic approach, the big picture viewpoint, regarding informational needs. In this way, they are a proactive rather than reactive means to predict the informational needs of a site. Simply put, signage master plans provide for and predict the future informational needs of a site in an effort to minimize changes in the signage as the site is developed over time. Chapter wrap-up. The dedicated purpose of signs is to communicate information. Therefore, the development of the information content system, what the sign says and where they say it, is the foundation of all sign programs. You can use the methods and advice in this chapter to plan any program's content infrastructure, after which you'll be well prepared to jump into actual design activity for the program's graphic and hardware systems, the subjects of the next two chapters, respectively.